Stabilization Fund webinar, Innovations in Property Tax Arrears Collection, Preventing Displacement and Abandonment. And yes, that's quite the big title. But really what we want to talk about here is on our tax foreclosure, our foreclosure prevention webinar last month. We had Wade Beltramo from the New York Conference of Mayors talking about how local government is basically between a rock and a hard place, in that municipalities are really dealing with an unanticipated and sizable revenue shortfall right now as a result of COVID, at the same time that residents are experiencing unemployment, if they're small business owners, financial stress. So, what do you do about tax collection? The municipalities need taxes more, to collect their taxes now more than ever in some respects. At the same time, they need to be looking out for their residents and to try to prevent tax foreclosure and loss of homes, vacancies, homelessness. We all know the negative outcomes of foreclosure. So just a little bit of housekeeping. I think the best way to do this is if you have questions, it'd be great to raise your hand and we'll try to unmute you and have you ask the question. But if sometimes that doesn't work, the mysteries of WebEx still elude us at times. So you can just type in the Q&A box at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and Tara or I will ask the question or read the comment, and feel free to do that while speakers are speaking, because sometimes it makes sense to have a question asked while someone is speaking or right at the end, rather than saving everything for the end. So we'll play it by ear. But anyway, first I want to say, look, taxes of all kinds are a complex area of discussion. We recognize that in 1 hour, we're not going to even begin to touch the tip of the iceberg on this topic. But what we wanted to do is provide some examples of what local governments are doing on the tax collection issue, especially when it comes to vulnerable populations, or just more generally the COVID effects on income right now. So, so we figured it's useful to share strategies, and we really welcome all the local governments on this call to also share what you're doing. We should have about 10 to 15 minutes at the end of this to talk through and share more widely, apart from what the panelists are going to tell you today. So, so first we'll start with the 3 examples, and then we will of tax arrears strategies, and then we go to the dreaded topic with one speaker, the dreaded topic of, well, what happens if you end up in tax foreclosure and the property is lost to the household? How do we avoid the deterioration of this now vacant property? What are some, what is one strategy apart from the land bank strategy that we talk about often? So we'll do that, and then we'll finish up with talking a little bit about reverse mortgages and a tax issue or two that is below the radar on reverse mortgages. So I think we'll get started now with our first speaker. Mark Nelson is the city administrator of the city of Poughkeepsie, and he's going to share with us a little bit of his history and also what Poughkeepsie has done recently in this space. So go ahead, Mark.
Thanks, Helene, and welcome everybody. Thanks very much for inviting me to speak, and I appreciate everybody taking time out of their schedules. It's a great panel. We did a quick preview the other day, and this one's exciting. So I'm going to go quickly through this and look forward to your questions on a lot of these topics if we have time at the end. Let me just give you a quick background. I'm currently the city administrator here in Poughkeepsie, and you might want to ask the question right off the top, why a city administrator is talking about municipal taxes and keeping people in their homes and anti-blight and all this stuff. So prior to coming here to Poughkeepsie, I was Connecticut's capital city, Hartford. I was their municipal tax collector through the heart of the housing crisis and left Hartford in 2016 to come to the city of Poughkeepsie as Commissioner of Finance. My background is municipal finance, a few years at Bear Stearns back in the day, but it's really my experience in Hartford as their tax collector, collecting approximately $250 million a year in municipal taxes, mostly real estate. So I'm going to talk a bit this morning about the use of installment payment plans to mitigate tax delinquencies, and how we can prevent foreclosure by working more proactively and kind of out of the box, really, with respect to how do we collect delinquencies. And my background, part of that, by the way, was in collections. So, in Hartford in 2008, just as the peak of the housing crisis was starting to come down the other side of that curve, the city was selling every year about $13 million in tax liens to third-party tax investors. And I know this group and others have had great webinars and information about the ills and the evil tax lien sales and so forth. So I won't get into that in too great detail. But when I left in 2016, the city's reliance on lien sales was down to $3 million a year. So we went from selling $13 million to selling $3 million. And how did we do that? We did it by putting property owners on installment plans and letting them pay monthly. The interest still accrued, but at its high point, this program had over 1,400 homeowners, and this was restricted to, at the time, residential properties, not commercial. But we had over 1,400 property owners on approved installment plans. What was our experience? And again, we compare and we can learn a lot by looking at the housing crisis and seeing what happened then, and then shifting to today's reality and coming away with some really good ideas about what we can do now quickly as we're in this pandemic. So what did we experience? Well, of the 1,400 folks that we had on payment plans, we experienced better than a 90% success rate. That means there were, 1 in 10 did default on their payment plans, went on to various levels of enforcement. But the vast majority, 91% in fact, completed their payment plans on time. They paid all of their taxes with delinquent interest. We don't emphasize this in the tax collection business, but Hartford's collection of past due interest as a result of this program was in the millions of dollars, anywhere from a low of $1 million to a high of $3 million. And again, what that means is that instead of selling your tax liens and letting the third-party investor reap all of that interest income, and again, that's their business model, the city was able to not sell the tax lien and collect that delinquent interest while it also kept all of those people in their homes. So one of the things I want to convey in the time I've got today and how we've started to roll that out here in Poughkeepsie is that it's almost counterintuitive. And this is what, I really like about this is that, how can municipalities, particularly cities like Poughkeepsie that are facing their own challenges, and maybe let me just segue quickly to that and then we'll tie it all together. But For those of you who don't know, the city of Poughkeepsie, not the town, but the city of Poughkeepsie, has faced a deficit in its general fund of $13 million. So when my mayor, Mayor Rollison, took office in January of 16, we had a $13.2 million deficit in our general fund. We didn't have a rainy day fund. City was in dire straits. We, in fact, were one of the very few financial restructuring board clients in New York State, and there may be a few others on this call. I hope they are joined us today. And I should thank the FRB and the Office of the State Comptroller, and particularly the State Office of Budget and others for their help as the city of Poughkeepsie started to turn itself around. Over the 4 years leading into the new decade, we cut that general fund deficit down to $7 million. We've cut it in half. But as we enter COVID, and I think that the thing that I'd like to stress is, the city of Poughkeepsie is hurting. And so for those on the call that, don't have a fund balance or have a limited fund balance, how do you get through this? And if you're facing those financial challenges, maybe the last thing you would think of is to be more lenient, for lack of a better word, or more flexible, probably a better word, with respect to your delinquent taxpayers, right? So you're seeing delinquencies rise, or you will, and it's not going to be a good situation, right? So it's going to get worse. We could spend a lot of time talking about the glut of evictions that are coming our way. Our purpose today is to talk about preserving home ownership, but the impact on renters has obviously a direct impact on that owner's ability to pay his or her taxes, and so it's a trickle-down problem, and the worst is still ahead. And so I just want to take a minute to look at what some other cities and towns and villages are doing. The most common response that I've seen is they're delaying payment dates, right? So, just like we've got more time to file our taxes, government is extending tax payment dates. And that's great as far as it goes. One of the other mechanisms being used somewhat widely is a pushback or a suspension in the enforcement timeline. So whether you use in rem foreclosures or tax lien sales or independent auctions, individual auctions of properties, no matter what your enforcement mechanism is, you may be a municipality that is shifting that timeline. Well, let me get really to the heart of my remarks today, and that is that when you talk about shifting the timeline of enforcement, or you talk about moving a deadline ahead 90 days or 6 months, what you're really doing is you're doing the same thing that the mortgage companies did in the early days of the housing crisis. They were not too slow to give forbearances. If you go back to 2006, 2007, the big banks were forbearance, 3 months no payments, 6 months no payments. It wasn't until you got into mortgage modifications. That word was not thrown around until later in the housing crisis, and you heard every excuse from the ownership of these tranches of mortgage-backed securities was too complex to get approval to modify. That was what we heard for a number of years, a number of months towards the gradual opening of what did work. So what did work? And going through this quickly again for the benefit of leaving some questions later, time for questions later, I'll tell you what worked. What worked in Hartford was installment payment plans. We didn't move the deadline. We simply said, you've got to get in touch with us. We wanted to speak to you as a property owner individually. We didn't want to just put out a press release saying your deadline is moved, because what's that going to do to your cash flow? My finance commissioner here was concerned about cash flow, and I'm sure you're all on this call concerned about cash flow. What I want to leave you with today, if I can leave you with 2 or 3 things, I think the most important thing, as Helene said, is that there is a way to both preserve our ability as municipalities to collect our taxes and pay the bills and protect essential services and continue to operate as a government successfully, right? And at the same time, give property owners the flexibility to make what payments they can. In the Hartford model, we collected more over those years if you factored in the collection of delinquent interest. We reduced our reliance on tax liens by 85%. We cut the tax foreclosure rate in a little more than half. And it would have been significantly better than that, but there were already a lot of foreclosures in the pipeline when we started this program. So let's just, if I can, just finish by saying that here in Poughkeepsie, last month we were able to convince our Common Council to pass a local law allowing for installment payments. Prior to that, if we got a partial payment, our tax collector needed to send it back, even if it was just a few dollars short. Since we passed that local law just a couple of months ago, we've got 130 people that are paying partial payments. Our finance commissioner is actually happier. The cash flow is not taking a big hit. And we really feel that had we just extended the deadline, we probably wouldn't have gotten any payment, right? So our cash flow is probably better than it would have been otherwise. We're going to be tracking these results carefully over the next year or two. As I said at the top, we think it's going to get worse before it gets better. And I will just finish by saying, if you extend your deadline and we get a resurgence of COVID or there is no vaccine, what are you going to do? You're going to continue to extend your deadline? You're going to delay? It can't just be the delay, the permanent delay of enforcement. You've got to do something to preserve your cash flow. I know I'm out of time. Helene, thank you so much, and I appreciate the time you gave me this morning. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Helene, I think you're muted.
I could hear you, David, but I didn't hear Helene.
Yeah, Helene's muted. So I'll just jump in and say that the next panelist is Keith Lucas, who is the Director of Planning for the Buffalo Urban Renewal Agency. And Keith is going to talk to us about a number of mechanisms that they're using, including liberal payment plans, a number of other mechanisms. So Helene, did you have anything you wanted to add before turning it over to Keith?
No, I just said I was turning it over to you. So go ahead.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm turning it over to Keith. Keith?
Yes. Thank you, David. Thank you, Louise. Well, I guess my comments today are going to be about a program that predates the pandemic, and it's something that the city started working on kind of in combination with a revaluation that took place, and which just finally hit the mailboxes on July 1st. So the city hasn't done a citywide reval in about 20 years. They've done some neighborhoods here and there, but for the most part, the city hadn't been touched in quite some time. So when they were thinking about doing the reval, there was some concern that some neighborhoods might see a significant jump in, both the values and then their taxes as well. And so what happened was the state assemblywoman, Crystal Peoples-Stokes, sponsored some legislation in the state assembly, fairly specific to Buffalo. It only applies to cities with populations between 250 and 300,000 people. It carves out 7 census tracts in the city that had 2010 median household incomes below a certain number, which was $16,056, a pretty specific number. And it made the homeowners in those 7 census tracts eligible for some relief on the new assessments. And what that entails is, number one, you have to be 65 years or older, you have to be a homeowner for at least 25 years, and you have to have a household income less than $30,000. So if a homeowner within any of those 7 census tracts meets those 3 criteria, they can apply. And what that would do is it will freeze your assessment at the prior level so that it won't go up with what the reval might have caused it to rise to. It's seen basically as a way to protect, again, older homeowners who've been in the neighborhood a long time, are probably on fixed incomes, and might not have the ability to handle a significant increase in their property taxes. So we'll find out how it's going to work. I think people had to have applied by February, and I don't have the numbers yet as to how many folks took advantage of this. When we ran numbers just to see who it might apply to, you've got about 45,400 homeowners in the city of Buffalo. Within those 7 census tracts, there's a little over 2,100. So almost 5% of the homeowners in the city are in those 7 tracts. When you look at things like over 65, living there 25 years and having incomes below 30, you're talking anywhere from a little over 600 to almost 800 households within each of those categories. So if you take the lowest number, figuring that if you've got to qualify for all 3, the lowest number, there's 637 households that are headed by somebody who's 65 or over. So that number is about 1.5% of the whole cohort of homeowners in the city. So it's not going to be a program that impacts a whole lot of folks, but I think the goal again was just to make sure that some of these older homeowners who are in neighborhoods that have seen some pretty significant appreciation, but that still remain lower income communities could benefit from taking advantage of this program. And that's all I have.
Keith, you had one other piece of information about the tax foreclosure sale, the auction. I think you wanted to mention.
Yes, in this exemption program, the city does run an in-rem auction every year where it forecloses on properties that are 3 years behind in the taxes. Typically, that happens in the fall and October of each year. But at this point, the city's postponed it until the spring. Right now, it's a tentative date. We're not sure if we're going to follow through in the spring or just push it back till 2021 fall. But they have made the decision not to go ahead with the closure auction on the annual schedule that it typically follows. And we're also very generous with a lot of things set up. So typically in years past, anybody who comes in before the auction says, yeah, I want to save my property, I can pay a few dollars. The law has always been very accommodating, with the understanding that it's just a pain for the city to take ownership and process these properties. So our goal is to keep as many as possible in the hands of the current owners.
Okay, thanks, Keith. And just reminding all the panelists to please mute until you're speaking, just so that we avoid some of the feedback. And so I'm now introducing my colleague, David Hunter, who's a Senior Program Officer with our LISC New York State Housing Stabilization Fund program, who, when he and I read about the New York City Council's recent legislation within the past week or so, said, well, we have to share this, so we'll jump in and do so. So David, go ahead. Tell us what's going on with New York City.
Thanks, Helene. Yeah, so at the end of June and in the context of, very difficult fiscal year budget negotiations, the City Council took up and passed 2 property tax relief measures for homeowners and small landlords who are adversely affected by COVID-19. Both measures were signed by the mayor this week on the 7th and apply retroactively to July 1st, such that qualifying owners will be able to defer their July 1st property taxes either to September 30th or October 15th with a reduced or 0 interest rate on those payments. The 2 measures provide relief to different categories of properties and owners and to properties with different assessed values. The first measure, which was championed by New York City's public advocate, Jumaane Williams, provides allows for the deferment of July tax payments until September 30th with a 0% interest rate, which is down from the usual 3.25%. It applies to residential properties with an assessed value of $250,000 or less. And of course, important to note there that the assessed value is not market value. It's much lower than market value. So many properties qualify, but there are also personal requirements that limit the pool, so to speak. To be eligible, owners also have to live in the home. They have to have a combined income of less than $150,000 or be enrolled in a property tax installment agreement with the city's Department of Finance. And they have to demonstrate being adversely affected by COVID-19, which is defined very broadly. The Public Advocate's Office said that 99% of Class 1 homes, which in the tax classification system is most residential properties of up to 3 units, they said that 99% of Class 1 homes qualify, as well as 87% of condos, including those that are not more than 3 stories high. So lots of details to sort through there, but that's the first provision. The second measure, which is sponsored by Councilmember Margaret Chin, allows for deferred payments until October 15th and reduces the interest rate from 18% to 7.5%. And it applies to 2 categories of properties with an assessed value of $250,000 or higher. The first is Class 4 properties, which generally are all commercial and industrial properties, such as office, retail, et cetera, and all other properties not included in the other 3 tax classes. So Class 4 properties with an assessed value of $250,000 to $750,000, or other property with an assessed value over $250,000, where at least 50% of the property is used for residential rental dwellings, and contains no more than 30 rental units, of which at least 50% must be rent regulated accommodations. So again, lots of details to sort through there. There are also, in terms of demonstrating being adversely affected by COVID-19, there are specific criteria that also apply, which I won't go into, but we'll share a link to that information after the webinar. So I guess just to wrap up, like this is, we're hearing, this is just one example of a municipality that's trying to anticipate and respond to financial hardship resulting from COVID-19. And I think we'll hear now from Mark Domenico, the City of Rome, and Mark is the Chief Code Enforcement Officer and Building Director. He's also a registered architect with the City of Rome, and he's joined by Brian Adams, the city's Deputy Treasurer. Mark?
Thank you, Dave.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit today about a process that the City of Rome has had in place for going on 22 years now. It's the creation of what we call the Real Property Committee. And just to give a little bit of context to the folks that are joining us today, the City of Rome is a 72 square mile territory with 33,000 people. We have an urban core and we have an outside district that's relatively rural. We also have within the confines of our city the former Griffith Air Force Base. So basically, the Real Property Committee was the primary reason this was developed was to really eliminate some of the most significant flaws associated with the auction process, which is predatory investing. You know, a lot of times, you know, before the real property committee, you would have folks buying things at auction. These were the folks that had a history of neglect with their properties. They were in it to amass rentals, you know, and we had a problem with that. The other thing was quality control. You know, with the property maintenance code in New York State, there's a minimum standard to maintain a property, the exterior, the yard, and the quality within there can range from very poor to excellent. So we wanted to be engaged in the process to get into the business of quality control with respect to rehabilitation. And the third issue was land use. You know, we can vet things before they get to a point where there's applications made to the Zoning Board of Appeals. A lot of times, you know, if somebody buys something at auction and they want to put a slaughterhouse in the middle of a residential zone district, you know, they have the ability to approach the board. That's their right. And certainly in the process, although it has defeat written all over it at the end, it whips up the community. It creates a lot of dissent, and it puts the community through a lot of aggravation that was really unnecessary. So, what I'd like to do, at least on the front end, is kind of turn it over to Brian so he can explain to everybody the kind of how we created this. The City of Rome is a FDU. We do foreclose on properties, and the county forecloses on properties. So with that being said, I'm going to just let Brian talk a little bit about how the structure is and what agreements we have with the county in order to create this process. So, Brian?
We at the start of out with 300 plus properties. At the end of the foreclosure process, we foreclose on about 30 properties, give or take, and about 20 properties end up on a payment plan. There are some stipulations for the payment plan. They need 25% down. The rest is paid over 12 months. They would need homeowners insurance, and the city would have to be added as a lost payee. And we have codes go over and check the property to make sure, you know, it's not falling down or anything of that nature. So I'm going to start talking about the intermunicipal agreement with the county. Basically, the biggest part of that is the pre-qualification process. We have basically a 2-year window. So when we foreclose on a property, that's usually when we will pre-qualify with the county, and that gives us 2 years to sell the property, rehab the property, get the deed in our name before the county could ever step in and foreclose on the property themselves. So with that said, it's kind of important when we should pre-qualify a property, because say the county was going to foreclose and it was on their auction list for August or a couple months ahead. If we wanted them to remove the property from their list, we could pre-qualify the property before we ever foreclose. So we can pre-qualify a property before we even foreclose and it's in our name. So the only time we would really want to do that ahead of time would be if we wanted the property off the county's list, so that way we can foreclose instead of the county. But once again, we have to keep in mind the 2-year window, because about 90% or maybe even more of our properties end up getting rehabbed. Rehabs are usually around a year or so. So that basically wipes out the first year of the pre-qualification. So we always have to keep in mind the timing of the pre-qualification. I would like to mention that we start our foreclosure process after 2 years of delinquent taxes, and we usually foreclose in the 3rd year. The county starts theirs after the 3rd year, and they take it after the 4th year. So we always have a 1-year window. I would say about 99% of the time that works out where we would always have a head start. There are a few cases here and there where they might have, say, paid our tax 2 years prior, but not the county, so that would leave us on an even playing field, but the county tax is a lot less. So 99% of the time, that does not occur, because if they were struggling with money, they would pay, you know, the less amount of taxes that they could. Once the pre-qualification goes into effect and they agree upon it, all the county taxes from that point prior get wiped out. They don't actually remove it from their system until the deed goes through in our name, and then that's when they will literally go in their system, expense off all their back taxes, and then it would start from that point forward. So from that point forward, even for the 2 years that it's pre-qualified and we have that window, they do collect taxes. However, most of the time it's under a rehab agreement, and that cost gets taken over by the rehabber, let's say, or the owner coming up. We do offer extensions on the rehabs, which occur once in a while because of things that go on like COVID, where they can't get the supplies that they need or anything like that. And in that case, I just have to communicate with the county, and they're usually pretty good, and they will allow us to go over the 2-year window as long as there's extension, the legal extension signed by both parties. So they usually work with us pretty good. When I first started, we kind of ran into a couple issues because I was new on our end, and Betsy, the person at the county that I deal with, was also new on her end. So there were little miscommunications, obviously, that would occur anywhere. But we've ironed that out, and we're working together very closely. Another thing I like to mention is with this intermunicipal agreement, I always need to check on the county's auction. So every quarter, I will go look at what properties the county is looking to auction off to make sure that we are not trying to take theirs. And then I call the county, say there was a property, 911 Main Street, that we were foreclosing on, the county's foreclosing on. I would call them up and discuss the situation, and usually they will remove it. And once again, sometimes they will have to pre-qualify at that point for them to remove it from their list. But like I said again, they're very good working with us, most recently especially.
So at the end of the process that Brian goes through, he develops a master list. So now we have a master foreclosure list. Once we have that, then it goes to the real property committee. And I'm going to go through real briefly what the steps are with regards to that. The first thing we do, we look at the list, we look at the inventory. The Code Enforcement Office has a line item about $100,000 a year to deal with demolition. So we may have 4, 3, 4, 5 buildings right off the mark that are unmarketable, they're in just such poor condition. We'll remove them from the inventory. Then the inventory, what we'll do is we'll secure and stabilize the property. We'll mow the lawns. We'll clean the junk and debris out of the property around the yard. We'll board up the windows if they need to be boarded up, and we'll do some basic stabilization of the properties. It then goes to the point where we will set a minimum bid. We'll work with the assessor, who will then determine a value. Could be anywhere from $500 up to $60,000, $70,000, depending on the property and the condition. Once that is set, it then goes, we advertise in the paper of a showing. So over the course of a week, we will show 30 properties. We'll have one individual that will have 5 people at this showing, 20 people at this showing, and it gives the applicant the opportunity to go in, to scope the project, have enough information to formulate a proposal. We have formal proposal forms. They need to be filled out. They need to disclose their minimum purchase price or a purchase price. They have to disclose their scope of work, the ultimate intended use of the property, amongst a bunch of other things. Those proposals, once gathered, they're due at the last business day of every month. It's kind of a rolling inventory based on what you have, but it's standing end of every month. This proposal has got to be in a sealed envelope, date stamped to the clerk. The clerk gathers those up, and then we have a committee meeting every month. Committee members will then review the proposals, and this is where the kind of rubber hits the road. We then get into the vetting. We get a report on these properties from the Code Enforcement Office with regards to codes history of this applicant. Brian will do he'll do a tax search to see if any property that this individual owns within the city of Rome is delinquent. That's an automatic disqualifier. They either have to make payment immediately in order for the real property committee to review their proposal, or they're disqualified. We look at their criminal history from the police department. We look at the animal control history. So it gives us the opportunity really to understand, you know, it's not just about getting rid of the property and having somebody. We want these properties to be reintegrated back and be contributing to the quality of life issues and the quality of what they are going to be doing. And this is one of the things that we've seen that just doesn't happen at the auction process. It's kind of blind to these issues. So once the proposals are vetted, you may have 4 or 5 proposals. You know, you deliberate, you make a decision. The board will then is a recommending body to where this will then go to the Common Council, and 9 times out of 10, the Common Council will agree to enter into the rehabilitation with this individual for this stated time frame, for this price, for this use. And then at that point, the applicant now has exclusivity to move forward. Because at the end of this process, we do not guarantee clean title. These are quick claim deeds at the end. At that time, the applicant has the ability, if they so choose, to get an attorney and to do a title search to understand any of the outstanding liabilities associated with this property. If they do that and they decide that, hey, you know, there's JCPenney's lien for, you know, $50,000, then they can back out. But if they want to move forward, then they sign the rehab agreement. At that point, now there's a 25% deposit that is non-refundable. They're now subject to the time frames that they articulated in their proposal, and then we move forward with the process. They have the rights to enter the property. They do have some insurance requirements too that they need to satisfy. Then it goes to basically a traditional building permit process. So my office would issue a building permit. We'd attach the scope of work, and then we would basically manage it like we manage any other property, with respect to a time frame that may be more restrictive than what you get typically on a building permit. Depends. And then we advise the committee at our monthly meetings. Like we just had an extension request come over today. Somebody needs a 60-day extension on something, so the committee will vote on it and approve the 60-day extension and so on and so forth. So that's pretty much it. There's a lot of detail we do at www.romenewyork.com. You will see under the Codes Department, there's Real Property Committee. There are a number of documents and forms that kind of go through this. Frequently asked questions. There is a list of properties you'll see that are up right now for sale, and sample rehabilitation agreements. And it works out very, very well. We've since 1998, we put nearly 400 properties in vacant lots valued over $5 million back to the tax rolls, and our success rate with these rehabilitation agreements are about 95%. So we've had an excellent turnaround. It is labor intensive. We're a small city, but it is so beneficial in so many ways. It's been an excellent program that we've instituted.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark and Brian. Appreciate it. So a quick segue. Our last speaker is Kerry White, Special Assistant for Housing and Community Development at the Office of the Attorney General, State of New York. And we all know Kerry at this point, and really appreciate that she's going to go ahead and talk a bit about reverse mortgages and the under-the-radar tax issues. So go ahead, Kerry, and thanks for joining us.
All right. Thank you, Elaine. Happy to join and be here. I know we're short on time, so I'm going to go quickly, and then if people have questions, I'm always happy to talk offline, or we can set up another conversation. So reverse mortgages, if people don't know what they are, they're also called home equity conversion mortgage. These are mortgages that are offered to seniors, 62 and older. The idea, instead of paying the principal and interest of the loan as you go, like in a conventional mortgage, that loan doesn't have to be paid off until the homeowner dies or the home is sold. So it's supposed to help seniors tap into their equity of their home, which can be helpful for some seniors, but there are some issues with reverse mortgages. Primarily, the seniors are still responsible for taxes, insurance, and maintaining the home, and defaulting on those things can trigger foreclosure, which could cause the senior to lose their home, which is something that none of us want to see. These loans are generally insured by HUD, and this actually causes some of the problems, which we're going to get to. So when a senior doesn't pay their taxes and they have a reverse mortgage, the servicers step in really quickly and pay the taxes. So from a government perspective, you are unlikely to see any default. And this actually goes back to HUD, because HUD's requirements of how the servicers can get the insurance money, can get HUD to take over the loan at the end, forces the servicers to be really aggressive in moving the foreclosure forward. So as soon as there's this default, the homeowner isn't going to make their tax payment, the servicer steps in, but then they start the foreclosure process with HUD. Some other things to say about this: the issue that HUD has is really that they won't allow there to be another lien on the property that's in a position above their loan. So the other thing this means is that payment plans won't cure the default. So even if the homeowner is able to talk to their city or their county and get on a repayment plan, they're still in default of their mortgage, and they can still be pursued and foreclosed on. So one thing that the Attorney General's office is partnering with some counties and servicers and an organization, the Center for New York City Neighborhoods, to do is create a loan program for seniors who are at risk of reverse mortgage default. This program is called IRMA, the Equitable Reverse Mortgage Assistance Program. It's a very small program. We expect to, in the next year to 2 years, to assist 120 to 125 seniors at risk of reverse mortgage foreclosure. The idea is this program the seniors could get small loans to help with the initial problem, the unpaid taxes, and then the senior will work with a housing counselor through the HOP network to try to figure out a long-term solution. This is really only this program is really available to seniors who somehow have the means or could get family involved or something, that they would be able to make the tax payments going forward, but there was an issue. Maybe it was a misunderstanding of what their responsibilities were. Maybe it was, a one-time health issue. Maybe if somebody told their daughter, like, look, if your mom doesn't pay their taxes, that she might lose their home. Like, those types of things often can be resolved and could, prevent a senior from losing their home for a relatively small one-time tax payment. So that's what we're hoping to do through this program. But we are also, through this program, we are trying to work with local governments and foreclosing government entities, as well as try to talk to HUD about if there are ways to prevent this program. We've already, the Attorney General's office and other Attorney General's office across the country have already, written letters to HUD suggesting that they should consider seniors entering into repayment plans, that those shouldn't be considered defaults as long as the senior continues to pay those repayment plans. We also, want to explore if there's other means. I think, the Buffalo program that Keith Lucas talked about, like for seniors, if those seniors have reverse mortgages, they actually might be protected. So are there other programs like that, or what New York City has offered? And can we try to figure out how to support this group of seniors? The last thing I'll say about reverse mortgages, just to give more context on why this is happening now. Prior to 2018, reverse mortgage foreclosures didn't has to follow the other foreclosure rules and laws in the state, meaning they didn't have to give pre-foreclosure filing notices to Department of Financial Services, like homeowners didn't get the required counseling sessions with servicers when they were experiencing foreclosures. So this changed in 2018, and that's done a couple of things. One, that provides more opportunities for seniors to get assistance and maybe work out the foreclosure, but it also provided a lot more data, because now that these servicers were required to notify DFS when they were filing foreclosures, we actually know how many reverse mortgage defaults there are happening across the state, which we looked at when developing this program. So the program is happening in 10 counties and New York City across the state. We're partnering directly with the top 3 servicers to work on this program, because like I said, they step in and pay the defaulted taxes and then start the foreclosure process. So we want to make sure that we can figure out when we can make the loan for the senior, so that it doesn't trigger the start of the foreclosure. So we actually need to work really closely with the servicers, but they've agreed to work with us on these issues. And, I think we are hoping to get some of the first loans out by the end of this month. But yeah, so I think that's kind of an overview of the program and the issue. So that's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Terry. We'll now open the floor to questions. You can either raise that hand and we'll see if we can unmute you, but sometimes, quite honestly, that doesn't work. So we have to find out from WebEx why. But if you want to type in a question or a comment in the Q&A box, Tara can read those. For some reason, the messages themselves are not appearing for me to read. I see her response, but the other thing is we will circulate this recording. We'll also circulate the documents and links that have been mentioned by the speakers, so that everyone can have, the samples or additional information at your fingertips. But let's go ahead and see if we can answer some questions. We're also looking for local governments who are on the phone. If you're doing something to alleviate the tax burden during COVID, please chime in, jump in, and share with us what your municipality is doing. The more information, the better, is on this webinar. Okay. Tara, are you seeing any hands raised?
There's a question for Mark. Are you aware of programs similar to the City of Rome that other municipalities are operating? This is for Mark Domingo.
Yeah, Mark Domenico here. I do know that there were some municipalities that have adopted the similar program modeled on what the City of Rome has been doing. I believe the City of Utica, which is not too far from here, has done that. We've gotten calls from other municipalities as well, inquiring of how you establish this process with the other governmental foreclosing units, and a lot of inquiry. I do know that the City of Utica is doing the same thing as well. They modeled the program.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Tara, any more questions?
No, at the present time, no. That was the only one I got.
And Helene, if I can, while we're waiting for a couple of other questions, if I could just comment, and really great comments from the other presenters. We heard particularly from Kerry on the reverse mortgages, and they obviously apply primarily to seniors, and from David on the New York City recent passage of various city laws, again based on assessed value thresholds and things like that, somewhat complicated, right? But here in Poughkeepsie, where we're still facing a $7 million general fund deficit, and this year in fiscal 2020, we're looking at a $5.1 million budget shortfall with potential layoffs and significant cuts to city services, how are we going to keep people in their homes? What I don't hear enough of, and just my personal opinion, is that we attempt to help property owners who are owner-occupied, maybe a little bit too much, and I would caution us all, and my comment to those on the call is, you know, in Poughkeepsie, the large percentage of the demographics that we need to be concerned with, they're not homeowners, they're renters. And the bottom line here is the disparate impact on communities of color, and particularly the unemployed, the marginalized people that are part of our community. I have not heard enough today about how are we going to help them. And if we focus on seniors and we focus on owner-occupieds, with all due respect, we're gerbils on the wheel, and committees and boards and recycling properties. You know, my question is, you know, you saw, if you're on the committee, you're going to see a big spike back in 07, 08. We're looking at a big spike here, and our processes are not going to work. When the courts reopen and evictions start coming, it is those communities that are going to be ravaged and savaged. And how do you keep those renters in their home is you must extend your options to non-owner occupied. And for 20 years in this business, I've heard so much about communities want to boost their owner-occupied rates at the expense of their rental rate. Well, that's great if everybody who's got, is marginalized can afford a home, but we're not there yet. And this is a crisis that we will be facing for the next 2 or 3 years. And it's people of color that are going to be evicted. And I have spoken to landlords here in the city of Poughkeepsie saying, how do you expect me to pay my taxes if my rent's not being? I'm a renter myself. I mean, I rent to people, and they are 3 months behind on their rent. What am I going to do? That property's in the state of Connecticut, and the foreclosure ban, or the eviction ban, was just lifted July 1, and I don't want to use any more time here. But you have hundreds of thousands of renters around the state that are facing eviction. And you've got to start extending tax payment plans and options to non-owner occupied. We're going to see a real tsunami of problems. And that affects cities like Poughkeepsie more than it applies to maybe upstate, more rural communities. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark. A really important point, because for owners who do rent out their 1 to 4 family houses, it's those renters that are very hard hit. And good point about the equity issues there, and how people of color are most adversely affected by that. Are there any questions or any other comments from the panelists? As you've heard the other panelists speak, if you want to jump in for the last few minutes, that would be great.
On my end, there are no questions. If everybody's asking for the presenters' email to contact them.
Well, it sounds like you're going to be a popular bunch when we share your emails. You know how that works. We convince you to be panelists, and now you will play the role of advisors, but I know that you're all willing and helpful, always helpful to our office, so thanks so much for that. Okay, we'll wait 1 more minute and see if we have any questions, and then we'll wrap up.
And Helene and Tara, my contact information is on our city website, www.poughkeepsie.com. I'm the city administrator, and always happy to talk to municipal colleagues about tax collection and municipal finance, particularly if you're a distressed city with water, and particularly if you've got a widely diverse community. Please email or call me at any time. Thanks.
Hey, Mark.
We'll share all the information. Go ahead, David.
Mark Nelson, just a follow-up. I think you said to date approximately 100 payment plans have been negotiated since you changed the policy. in the city of Poughkeepsie. Do you have a sense of how many additional payment plans you may strike, over the course of the next year? I mean, what's the pool of, what's the potential?
So my guess is it'll follow, the pandemic curves we see on, TV every day, right? So we're going to see one of these things that we saw back in the housing crisis. But it's a great question, David. I would assume that at some point over the next maybe year or so, you'll have several hundred folks that are on payment plans. You're going to see the same thing that you see in your tax foreclosure and redemption of delinquent taxes, right? So if you've got a 2-year redemption period, you see many property owners are always what I call rolling delinquents, right? They're always delinquent, but they know what the timeline is and they know where the drop deadline is, right? So here's the problem with that is that you're almost hurting them by letting them do that because they're paying the municipality more interest. It's the converse of what we talked about earlier in my remarks about the city of Hartford. But the answer to your question is you're going to see in the city of Poughkeepsie an increase in the number of payment plans, and it is only that increase that will hold that curve when it comes to foreclosure. It is not the delay of the payment due date. It is not the delay of the foreclosure or the in-rem auction. Those will only make the matter worse because it's like closing the doors and pushing everybody towards a date in the future. But if you employ payment plans, you're taking pressure. It's like a pressure release valve. You're helping your cash flow, you're keeping people in their homes, and you're reducing the number of foreclosures. The Hartford model proves that. $13 million a year in lien sales down to $3 million a year, while at the same time, your installment plans went from 0 to 1,400. Those curves, you put them on a graph if I had the time to do that, and you would be forever convinced that the solution here is mortgage modifications equal tax payment plans. But mortgage forbearances equal simply more delays, and that those mortgage forbearances that didn't work are the same thing that many municipalities are doing around the state and the country. They're delaying their due dates. That doesn't work. It's this is, and it's proof positive is what you're seeing in the media now about evictions, right? So the courts closed and evictions stopped. Well, wasn't that great? Well, now we've got 15,000 of them backed up in, municipalities, and the courts are opening. What's going to happen then? We've created unintentionally a worse nightmare. Sorry.
So thank you so much, Mark. I hate to stop you because what you're saying is so helpful, but we've come to the end of our webinar. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you so much to our participants. And we will circulate all of the information and the recording itself. And please, if you have ideas for additional webinars, we're looking for what you want to know, and we'll put it together. So thank you, everyone, for joining, and this concludes our webinar. Take care, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.